Hi everyone, I'm Remy V. Sobermonte, and today I will be talking about the chapter 5, which is competition and cooperation. Objectives. After reading this chapter, you should be able to first understand the difference between competition and cooperation. Second, describe the process of competition. Third, detail the psychological studies of competition and cooperation. Fourth, discuss the social factors influencing competition and cooperation. Fifth, explain why competition can be both good and bad. Lastly, understand how to balance competitive and cooperative efforts. Competition. The term competition is popularly used to refer to a variety of situations. For example, we compete against others, against ourselves, against the clock or record book, and against objects and the elements like rock climbing. But in defining competitions, most researchers have focused on situations in which people compete against others in organized physical activities. According to Oakley 1994, competition is a social process that occurs when rewards are given to people on basis on how their performance compare with the performance of others, doing the same task or participating on the same event. According to these definitions, the rewards in competition are limited to those who outperform others. Thus, being a process, competition has a reward structure, which fosters the notion that the success of one participant or a team automatically causes the failure of others. Cooperation has been defined as a social process through which performance is evaluated and rewarded in terms of the collective achievements of a group of people working together to reach a particular goal. This definition implies that a cooperative reward structure is characterized by the mutual involvement of more than one participant. Rewards are therefore shared equally by everyone in the group, and the group's success depends on the collective achievement of all the participants. They may simply combine strong achievement orientation with cooperative or individualistic orientations. In fact, cooperative people are just as likely to be successful as us as competitive people. In fact, cooperative people are just as likely to be successful as are competitive people. Over the years, competition has been given a bad rap. People often focus on negative aspect of competition, whereas cooperation is seen as a positive alternative to competition. However, Shields and Bredimer argued that what in the past has been called the good and bad of competition is better viewed as competition and the competition. In addition, competitors follow the spirit of the rules even if doing so results in competitive disadvantage. Fairness to their opponents is more important than merely following the rules. According to Martins, competition is more than a single event. Rather, it involves a process that encompasses four distinct events or stages, which are the objective competitive situation, subjective competitive situation, response, and consequences. This process somewhat resembles the model of stress presented in Chapter 4, which provides a good way to view the competitive process. Stage 1. Objective competitive situation. Martins proposed a definition of the objective competitive situation is stemming for social evaluation theory that involves a standard for comparison and at least one of other person. The comparison standard can be an individual past performance level, an idealized performance level, or another individualized performance. The primary thing that distinguishes a competitive situation from other comparison situations is that the criteria for comparison are known by at least one person who is in position to evaluate the performance. Example, you get out alone for a 3-mile jog, setting a goal for yourself to run this distance in 21 minutes, while your previous best was 22 minutes. Stage 2. Subjective competitive situation. regardless of whether people are in objective competitive situation because they seek the situation or because circumstances place them in. They must evaluate the situation in some way. This brings into the play the next stage, the subjective competitive situation, which involves how the person perceives, accepts, and appraises the objective competitive situation. For example, one gymnast may look forward to competing in a championship meet as a means of gaining experience, whereas another gymnast facing the same objective situation may dread the upcoming meet. Similarly, one runner in adult fitness class may want to turn every jog into a race, whereas others seeks to avoid comparison with other runners in the class. Jill and Dutter, 1988, attempting to define the term more clearly, developed the Sport Orientation Questionnaire, or SOQ, to provide a reliable and valid measure of competitiveness. Sample questions are given in the Sport Orientation Questionnaire. Using the SOQ, Jill and Dutter, 1988, found three types of competitive orientations, all of which represents different subjective outcomes of a competitive situation. First, competitiveness is an enjoyment of competition and desire to strive for success in competitive sport settings. A competitive person simply loves to compete and actively seeks competitive situations. Second, win orientation is a focus on interpersonal comparison and winning in competition. It is more important to beat other competitors than to improve on personal standards. Lastly, goal orientation is a focus on personal performance standards. The goal is to improve one's own performance, not to win the competition. Stage 3, Response. According to Martins, competitive process model, after a person appraises a situation, she decides to either approach or avoid it. The chosen response initiates the third stage of the model. If the decision is not compete, then the response stops there. However, a response to compete can occur at the behavioral, psychological, or physiological level, or at all three levels. For example, at the behavioral level, you might decide what type of opponent you prefer to play. Someone better than you, so you might improve. Someone worse than you, so you can make sure you win. Or someone equal to you, so you have a challenging competition. On a physiological level, your response might be that your heart starts to beat faster and your hands become cold and clammy. Several psychological factors, both internal and external, can also affect a person's response. Motivation, confidence, and perceived ability level are just a few of the internal factors affecting the response. Facilities, weather, time, and opponent's ability are some external influences. Yes. The final stage of the competitive process results from comparing the athlete's response with the standard of comparison. Consequences are usually seen as either positive or negative, and many people equate positive consequences with success and negative consequences with failure. However, as we discussed earlier, the athlete's perception of the consequences is more important than the objective outcome. For example, although you might have lost the game, you might still perceive the outcome as positive if you played well and meet your own standards of excellence. In essence, competition is learned rather than innate. Social process that is influenced by the social environment, including coaches, parents, friends, and sports psychologists. Competition is inherently neither good nor bad. It is simply a process, and the quality of leadership largely determines whether it will be positive or negative experience for the participant. Competition and aggression. It's not new that a primary focus on winning and beating an opponent can produce a hostility and aggression among teams. Fighting has often erupted in professional and college sports that encourage contact and collision between players such as football, hockey, and basketball. It is not the competition that produces the aggressive behavior and hostility. Rather, the feelings and behaviors stem from the focus on doing whatever it takes to win, even when this means unfair play or injuring an opponent. Example: two teammates competing for a starting position might develop hostility and try to undermine each other's play. Effect of competition and cooperation on performance. We can see the potential negative effects of competition when we look at the relationship between competition and performance. Johnson and Johnson, 1985, thoroughly analyzed 122 studies conducted between 1924 and 1981 for the effects of competitive and cooperative attitudes on performance. In 65 studies, cooperation was seen to produce higher achievement and performance than was competition. Only 8 studies showed the opposite. Furthermore, in 108 studies, cooperation promoted higher achievement than did independent or individualistic work, whereas the opposite occurred in only 6 studies. The, the superiority of cooperation held across a variety of tasks involving memory and quality, accuracy, and speed of performance. Johnson and Johnson concluded from the review that in no type of task are competitive efforts effectively than competitive or individualistic efforts. Rather, on most tasks, cooperative efforts are more effective in promoting an achievement. However, the nature of the experimental task in many of these studies called for a cooperative strategy over a competitive strategy. That is, if participants had chosen to compete, their performance would have been poorer than when they cooperated. A study by Stans and Gardwood, 2012, provides a good some example of effects of different competitive or cooperative goals on performance where the competition directions would not necessarily produce poorer performance when compared with cooperative or individualistic instructions. Although cooperative efforts appear to produce better performance than do competitive efforts when a performer has to work with another person to achieve a particular goal. Individuals may perform better when competing against others than they would when simply performing the task alone. It is important to remember that competition itself does not produce negative consequences. Rather, it is the overemphasis on winning that is counterproductive. In fact, Johnson and Johnson, 1999-2005, note that they see a limited role for competition if properly constrained. Along this line, appropriate competition has the following characteristics. It is voluntary. The performance of winning is not so high that it causes disabling stress. Everyone must have a reasonable chance to win. The rules are clear and fair, and the relative progress can be monitored. That's all for my part. Thank you for listening.